At my father's funeral, they laughed at me like I was nothing. But when the will was read, the whole room went silent. One sentence was all it took to show who he truly trusted and who he never forgave. I stood at the back of the church, trying to stay small, not because I wanted to hide, but because their stares burned hotter than the Florida sun outside. My sister-in-law smirked when I walked in. My older brother barely nodded. And when I accidentally bumped into the flower arrangement near the casket, someone chuckled loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not with all their eyes waiting for me to break. They'd already written their version of the story that I was the failure, the burden, the afterthought. A woman who never quite made it, who clung to Dad in his final days like a lost child. They wore grief like designer clothes, crisp, polished, and perfectly timed. But the ache in my chest was real. I'd been there when the machines beeped there. Last, I'd wiped his lips and whispered, "You can let go now." I thought that meant something. When the priest finished his prayers, the real show began. People whispered as the family lawyer, Mr. Dalton, stepped forward with the will in his hands. My brother leaned back in his chair, confident. My cousins shifted closer. I stayed still, staring at my father's name on the envelope like it was. A secret I wasn't meant to hear. Then Mr. Dalton read that one sentence, just one, and suddenly everything stopped. The smirks faded, the whispers died, and for the first time that day, they all looked at me, not with pity, not with contempt, but with something that tasted like fear. They always said I was different. Not the kind of different that earns a kid praise for creativity or independence, the kind that gets you labeled as difficult. From the time I was little, I sensed it. Thanksgiving dinners, family reunions, even birthdays. I was the one. Asked to take the group photo, not be in it. I wasn't mistreated outright. It was quieter than that. 1,000 tiny exclusions that told me I didn't quite belong. My older brothers, Stephen and Marcus, were the golden boys. Straight A students, athletes, eventual husbands to women who could host a cocktail party without breaking a sweat. My mother used to say they were just like your father. I never quite figured out what that meant for me, because I certainly wasn't. I preferred books to people, silence to small talk, and had a stubborn streak that no one in my family appreciated. Least of all my mom. When I turned 35 and still hadn't married, the family stopped asking about my love life. By 42, I was barely getting invites to weddings or baby showers. My father, though, he was different. Quiet man, but thoughtful. We didn't talk often, but when we did, I felt seen. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a room. I didn't know I'd been living in the dark. Still, even with him, there was distance. Years passed where we only spoke on holidays. I used to wonder if he saw me the way the rest of them did, as the one who drifted too far from the mold. But something changed in his final year. I began visiting more. At first, it was just practical. Doctor's appointments, prescription pickups. Then it became something else. He started calling just to talk, sharing stories I never heard, asking about me, what I wanted, how I felt. Looking back, those conversations were clues. Little breadcrumbs he was leaving, leading me somewhere. I wouldn't understand until that day in the church when he said, with just a sentence, what he never managed to say out loud. The funny thing about memory is how it plays tricks on you. I used to tell myself the coldness in my family wasn't real, that I was just sensitive, maybe a little dramatic. But when I started unpacking the past, the patterns sharpened like broken glass in the sunlight. I remembered one Christmas. I must have been about 12 when I made a scrapbook for my dad. It was homemade, a little messy, full of clippings and photos of us fishing, laughing, just being together. I wrapped it in red paper and placed it under the tree like it was the crown jewel of the season. He opened it with a soft smile, thanked me, and set it aside. 10 minutes later, Stephen gave him a Bluetooth speaker and everyone erupted with praise like he'd handed over the moon. No one ever mentioned my scrapbook again. Then there was my high school graduation. I walked the stage without much fanfare. No big dinner after, no signs or balloons. But when Marcus got his MBA, the family rented a hall. Caterers, speeches, even a slideshow. I helped set it all up. Not one person said thank you. I'm not telling you this to ask for pity. I'm telling you because it's the truth. And truth has a funny way of crawling out from under the rug when you're finally ready to stop pretending. Years later, when I sat with my father in his small, cluttered den, something slipped. He was watching a documentary about old Hollywood. Scandals, the kind where secrets spill decades too late. Out of nowhere, he turned to me and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How some people spend their whole lives lying to themselves about who the real villain is." I didn't ask what he meant. I was afraid of the answer. But now, I wonder if he was trying to tell me something about our family, about my mother, about my brothers, about why he always kept me at arm's length, even when it seemed like he wanted to reach for more. He knew things. Things I was only beginning to suspect. Stephen and Marcus were always the headline act. Stephen, the oldest, became a corporate attorney in DC, slick and unreadable, with a handshake like a contract. Marcus, 2 years younger, went into finance, hedge funds, real estate, the kind of wealth that made Thanksgiving conversations sound like CNBC segments. My father would beam when people asked what his sons did. I think he liked the way their titles sounded in his mouth. To outsiders, we were the perfect American family. A house with shutters, matching Christmas sweaters, polite family dinners. But if you paid attention, really paid attention, the cracks were obvious. Marcus had a temper, always just under the surface. Stephen could cut a person down with a single look, and somehow make it feel like you owed him an apology afterward. They... both married women my mother approved of, slender, well-dressed, proper. I always felt like an intruder around them, like I'd shown up to a black tie event wearing jeans and a question mark. At holidays, I'd catch snippets of whispered conversations. My name followed by a pause, a laugh, a side eye. Over the years, my contact with both brothers dwindled. They were busy. Their lives too full. When Dad got sick, they each visited once, for exactly 45 minutes. I timed it. Still, when he passed, they swept in like royalty, organizing the funeral, choosing the casket, reviewing the eulogy. Stephen insisted on reading a passage from Corinthians. Marcus coordinated a floral arrangement fit for a man of stature. I watched from the sidelines, invisible again, wondering if they even remembered I'd been the one by Dad's bedside when he couldn't speak anymore. But there was something else, a flicker in Marcus's eyes when the lawyer arrived, a twitch in Stephen's jaw. They looked confident, yes. But maybe, just maybe, they were afraid of something being exposed. It was a rainy Tuesday, the last time I saw my father alive. The hospital room was dim, except for the blinking monitor and the soft hum of the 4. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just from the illness, but from the way time can chip. Oh wait, a man. I brought him black coffee, even though the nurses told me he shouldn't have it. He smiled anyway, took a sip, and whispered, "Thank you for bringing something real." He had moments of lucidity, sharp and sudden, like lightning, cutting through fog. He asked about my garden, my favorite books, whether I still listened to that old Fleetwood Mac vinyl. I didn't realize it at the time, but those questions were his way of threading himself back into my life, or maybe acknowledging that I'd always been there in his, even when he didn't say it. Then he asked me to open the drawer beside his bed. Inside was a small notebook, the cover worn soft like old leather. "If anything happens," he said, "you'll know what to do with it." I asked what it meant. He only looked at me with those pale, fading eyes and said, "Son, truths don't belong in the room until everyone else has left." I sat with him for hours, read to him, played a voicemail from his granddaughter, Marcus's daughter, who, oddly enough, had called me instead of her dad. He didn't speak again, just held my hand, his grip weak but deliberate. When I finally stood to leave, he squeezed once, then let go. That was our goodbye. A week later, he was gone. I didn't look at the notebook again until after the funeral. But In that moment, standing in that hospital room with the rain tapping gently on the window, I felt something shift. Like maybe he was handing me more than memories. Maybe he was passing along a secret. The church was packed. My father had that kind of legacy, decades in the community, a business built from scratch. The kind of quiet generosity that earned him nods in grocery stores and free desserts at diners. But on that day, all I saw were masks. Stephen stood at the podium in a crisp navy suit, his tie the color of a lawyer's confidence. His voice was steady, his words polished like he was giving a closing argument in court. He was a man of great discipline, he said, a provider, a patriarch. All true on the surface. But sterile? Empty. Then Marcus spoke. He shared a rehearsed anecdote about fishing trips and life lessons. I listened, arms crossed, heart tight. They spoke of my father like a monument, not a man. No mention of the nights he called me just to hear my voice. No hint of the quiet way he softened near the end, like a man trying to atone without saying the word sorry. After the service, people approached them, shaking hands, dabbing tears, praising their strength. A few nodded at me. One woman I didn't recognize patted my arm and said, "You must be the niece." I didn't correct or dot at the reception. I hovered near the food table, watching my brothers bask in admiration. Stephen made a toast. Marcus took a phone call about a client emergency. My mother stayed near the pastor, speaking in hushed tones. No one asked me to say anything. No one offered condolences beyond the generic kind strangers give at funerals. And then Mr. Dalton arrived. He was a quiet man, gray-haired and wiry, holding a weathered leather folder. The room didn't notice him at first, but I did. He nodded to me. "We'll begin in a few minutes," he said gently. "Your father was very specific." That was the moment the air shifted. The masks didn't slip yet, but I saw the first. Tremors in the eyes of those who had worn them so well. The family gathered in the church's side hall, where a few folding chairs had been arranged in a makeshift semicircle. Mr. Dalton stood near the front, papers in hand, his expression unreadable. My brothers took their seats with the air of men expecting confirmation, not surprises. My mother sat stiffly, her lips pursed, already half checked out of the moment. I sat near the back, still unsure why he'd wanted me there at all. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat and began reading. The preamble was formal legal language, a lifetime reduced to clauses and conditions. Then came the list of beneficiaries, minor bequests to friends, donations to a local veterans group, a scholarship fund in my father's name. Stephen and Marcus nodded approvingly. It was all going as expected. Until it wasn't. Mr. Dalton paused, then looked up. "And to my daughter, Elise Marie Dawson," he read, "I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family home, all financial assets, and my shares in Dawson and Sons Construction in full." There was silence. No, not silence. Something heavier, like sound had been pulled from the room with a vacuum. My brother stared at him, blinking. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. No one moved. "One sentence," Mr. Dalton said again, as if to confirm. It was handwritten, witnessed, and notarized, clear and binding. I couldn't breathe. Not because of what I was being given, but because of what it meant. My father had known what this would do, and he'd done it anyway. No trust fund split 3 ways. No vague wording. Just my name. All of it. Stephen stood first. "There must be a mistake," he said, voice tight. Mr. Dalton shook his head. Marcus was still sitting, but his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. In that moment, no one laughed. No one sneered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible, I was undeniable. The shock didn't wear off, not for them. And not for me. Stephen pulled Mr. Dalton aside, demanding to review the documents more thoroughly. Marcus just stood still, staring at the floor, as if trying to undo the moment by sheer willpower. My mother didn't say a word, but the way she looked at me, it was like I'd committed some unspeakable betrayal. As the others trickled out of the room. One by one, I stayed behind with Mr. Dalton. I didn't ask questions at first. I just sat numb, wondering if I'd misunderstood everything. But he handed me a small envelope, my name written on it in my father's shaky handwriting. Inside was a key and a note. Look in the study desk, bottom drawer, you'll understand. Back at my father's house, now legally my house, I opened that drawer. It was packed with papers, bills, receipts, but beneath it all was a thin folder. Inside, I found letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, none of which had ever been sent. The oldest was dated nearly 20 years ago. The most recent? Just 2 months before he passed. Each letter peeled back layers I never knew existed. Apologies for silence. Regrets about choices. Warnings about people I had trusted, especially Stephen and Marcus. He hadn't just left me his estate. He'd left me the truth, and woven between the lines was something else. A question he couldn't bring himself to ask out loud. Could I forgive him for waiting this long? I read them all that night. Every word, every crossed out sentence, every tear-stained page. My father had written like a man who feared he'd never be heard, and maybe he was right. For years, his voice had been drowned out by tradition, by silence, by the loudness of those who took up all the space at the table dot in the first letter. He admitted what I'd suspected but never confirmed. He hadn't always believed in me. You were different, he wrote. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I did nothing. He called it cowardice. I called it honesty. Both were true. Another letter, dated the year my mother had her stroke, detailed a fight I never knew they'd had. She'd insisted on favoring the boys, on shielding them even when it meant alienating me. He'd gone along with it. It was easier than losing her, he wrote, but in doing that I lost you. One letter broke me open completely. He wrote about watching me from the window when I left the house after a particularly cruel Christmas. Dinner, the one where Marcus had mocked my job at the library and Stephen had said, "You'll never really understand responsibility." My father said he wanted to run after me, to apologize, to scream. But he didn't. I didn't know how to stand up to the family I helped create, he confessed. So I left you to stand alone. And you did. God, Elise, you did. There was no instruction in the letters, no demand for how to spend the inheritance, no plea for redemption, just a quiet offering of truth left in my hands like fragile glass. He hadn't written for legacy. He'd written to be understood. In the days that followed, the silence from my family said more than any outburst could have. Stephen sent a carefully worded email suggesting legal review. Marcus didn't reach out at all. My mother called once, not to speak, but to sigh heavily and hang up. I didn't respond. I spent my time going through the house, every corner thick with history. My father's flannel jackets still hung in the closet. His shaving brush sat by the bathroom sink. In his office, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, a quiet reminder that life moves on, whether you're ready or not. For a while, I wondered what to do with it all. The money, the house, the memories, it didn't feel like justice. Not at first. Justice, I had always believed, came in grand gestures or courtroom drama. This was quieter, stranger. It came in solitude and unread letters. In a choice made by a dying man, not to punish, but to finally speak. Eventually, I donated part of the estate to the community college where I once took night classes. I kept the house, turned the study into a reading room, left the drawer exactly how I found it. As a reminder, I didn't seek revenge. I didn't rub it in their faces. I simply lived. The last letter, the very last one, was only a few lines. You always had more strength than I did. I see that now. I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize it, but I'm grateful you were there at the end. I hope, wherever I am, you're still with me. I didn't forgive him all at once. That's not how forgiveness works. But I carried his words. With me and with time, they softened something hard inside me. He couldn't undo the past. But with one sentence, one bold, deliberate choice, he rewrote the ending. And for once, the story belonged to me. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?